Hey everybody, this is Graham and Micah with Brother Telepathy Football. We are back again with another video. Today we are going through our 2025 NFL Draft rankings. This time receivers are up. So obviously did a video on quarterbacks. We're looking at receivers this time. So we're going to go ahead and give, we didn't do this for our quarterback video, and we'll try to do this in maybe some other prospect breakdowns, but I want to give like an honorable mention, especially for guys who are kind of close to making the cut for us. So Micah, why don't you go ahead and do the first slide here? Just looking at our honorable mentions list. So we'll go ahead and start here. Obviously, Luther Burden, the third for me, is just outside of my top five. Maybe controversial take on that one here, but overall, he's like my 33rd ranked or 34th ranked prospect as of right now. So that could definitely be subject to change. But as I see it right now, I've got this guy here at the number 6 spot. I happen to like the guy at number 5 just a little bit more, and I feel like they're kind of similar players. So I'll leave it at that because I know Mike will have more to say on Luther Burden whenever he, spoiler alert, shows up on his list at some point in the video. So I'll save that. Michael, why don't you talk about Jack Beck just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Jack Beck, Besh, however it's pronounced, doesn't really matter.
I don't know if I butchered that. Sorry, Jack.
Either way, it's no big deal. I'm sure he
Jack's
doesn't
definitely
mind.
watching this video. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's in the comments section right now. No,
Yeah.
I think it's Besh, so I'm just gonna refer to him as Besh. But
Okay,
Jack Besh, yeah, actually very smooth athlete. I think that for multiple of these, I'm overall, Graham just said that Luther Burden's in his 30s for the big board. I'm overall lower, I think, on most of these prospects, receiver-wise, than Graham. Jack Besh fell right outside of my top, my top 5. I think he landed 2 spots lower than my number 5 prospect. But I think the Senior Bowl is what did it for me personally for a lot of these prospects. Jack Besh, obviously in the game, had the game-winning score. Obviously has the great story about his brother.
Yeah.
But no, super interesting prospect. I think he's actually good size, technically sound. I'm a fan of his game for sure. But we can kind of segue into the next one. And I'm going to let Graham kind of take over on this one just because he's a big Jalen Royals guy.
Yeah, obviously a little bit of a hot take here. I briefly touched on it in our big board rankings video for our first iteration of our big board. But yeah, I do have Jalen Royals top 5. I had him a little higher, and then I had to dial back on that a little bit just because there are some concerns which I think are viable. I'll kind of start there, maybe a little backwards, starting with some concerns and then going to the positives. But he's not quite as fast as I thought he was on first watch. I thought he could be like maybe even like a high 4.3 guy, low 4.4. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to run at the combine. I think we're going to be releasing this video before the receivers go here at the combine. But yeah, if he ends up being a little bit close to that 4.5 range, that's definitely going to impact a little bit of where I'm at with him. But overall, as a player, I do like his game quite a bit. I briefly alluded to it in our big board ranking video, but very clearly the best player on that Utah State roster. And I think that does matter, where you are clearly the guy. In that Boise State game, which I did a prospect breakdown video of that game for Jalen Royals, he ran like probably 2 or 3 like little smoke screens or, little slip screens to him back to back. And then they ran like a 3rd and long deep shot to him just back to back. I mean, they're clearly targeting this guy plenty often in the game and throughout the season. If we look at production, and I know that you and I aren't always huge on production, but I do think for receiver, I think production is important. If we look at, again, I kind of alluded to this in our other video, but if you look at, he only played like 7 games this year. And so he put up, big numbers in those games that he played in. If you were to project out his entire season, he would have had close to 1,500 yards, close to 100 catches, 10 touchdowns. So that's obviously very good production with a Utah State roster that's not very good around him. So there's that going for him as well. Obviously a big run after the catch guy like Luther Burden. But I think what separates Royals from Burden for me is his inside and outside versatility. He does play outside a lot. To me, I'll give a little bit of a player comp here. I kind of feel like Jalen Royals gives me a little bit of Deebo Samuel vibes. And I know you and I are not huge on Deebo Samuel, but I think that's the type of athlete that he is. And I think he's a little bit more technically sound than Deebo Samuel. But Deebo Samuel's a bit thicker and probably more of a bowling ball type of frame, but Jalen Royals has got good size too. So there's a lot to like for Jalen Royals for me. I know I just said a lot, but
No, yeah, no. Well, it's a player you really like, so I'm glad you gave your points on it. I love Jalen Royals' story as well. I'm a sucker for a good story. Really, really good. Strong work ethic. Someone who is overlooked as a prospect. I know you and I can probably relate to that a little bit, but yeah, Jalen Royals, a great player. I'm going to go to the other J and Mr. Jaden Higgins. I have an affinity for these Cyclones this year, these Iowa State Cyclones.
yeah.
Darian Porter being another guy who's really high on my board. Spoiler for my DBs, the frame and all that. But that's another video we can talk about. But Jaden Higgins, again, Senior Bowl guy, did a lot for me. Great frame. I love the size. I love the length. The release package is really something that caught my eye. Not even just at the Senior Bowl, just on film in general. He's got a basketball crossover at the line of scrimmage, and he definitely knows how to win with it. And you combine that with his frame, I think he could cause some problems at the next level. I accidentally muted myself. Cause some problems at the next level here. But we're going to go into the next, our number 4 players, and I'll start on this one. Matthew Golden. Yeah, obviously transfer player here from Houston over to Texas. A huge catch radius. I know there's a phrase. He's got that barn door catch radius. So anywhere in the vicinity, he's going to go up and get it. And I know you'll, spoiler alert for you, since you did it for me, you might allude to that here in a little bit. But yeah, no, I love Matthew Golden as a player. He stepped up big time with all those injuries. Isaiah Bond obviously falling short, who probably this time last year was going to be on this list. Obviously for the next incoming year, he was probably going to be the number 1 or number 2 receiver for most people, falling out of favor, and Matthew Golden took the opportunity and ran with it. So I really like Matthew Golden as a prospect.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. And again, spoiler, I might get into it a little bit. We'll see. But yeah, Emeka Egbuka for me is number 4. And so again, I will just go ahead and come out and say it. Matthew Golden is number 3 for me. The reason I've got let me start with some positive about Emeka Egbuka. Obviously, production is good. He's been in wide receiver university for some time there over at Ohio State. So the fact that he's in that same conversation as, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, all these guys, I mean, that obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr., that receiving group is just insane, obviously. And so for that sheer reason, he should be in this conversation, just the Ohio State wide receiver kind of trend. But as for Emeka Egbuka specifically as a player, you love the way he blocks. And I know it's kind of a random thing to throw out there, but he's a willing run blocker, and you and I talked about that in our draft guide video. So definitely a positive there for me on him. I'll go ahead and, because I mean, again, you may talk about Emeka Egbuka here a little bit, some positives. So I'll just say that from my end of things, his floor is quite high, but the problem with me on this one here is I think his ceiling is also a bit low too, just because, kind of like I talked about on the other side of the coin with Jalen Royals, Emeka Egbuka has just not played on the outside that much. He played vast majority of his snaps from the slot, which is not a bad thing. Obviously, you can be a wide receiver 1, pretty much full-time playing the slot. We've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown do it. So it's certainly a viable option, but I think he would need to go to the right team and the right system. And again, I just don't know if he's got the high-end traits to, warrant being a bit higher for me on this one. But you're talking about a productive player, year 1 for his entire career, that type of thing. I think Emeka Egbuka is your guy.
Yeah, and I think that as we transition and flip players here, with you obviously having Matthew going to the 3 and me having Micah Egbuka at the 4, I won't spend too much time because you covered a lot of what I want to talk about, particularly the ceiling being lower. Super polished as a receiver, but you don't really know what that athletic upside really looks like. Obviously, technically speaking, he's the best receiver in the class. I mean, he sat behind all these great receivers, as you've already mentioned. He's seen a lot of football. He's got a great receivers coach there at OSU. OSU. Thank you.
Yeah.
The initials are throwing me off, but no, super great player. I actually am quite confident that he could come in and be a wide receiver 2 immediately, and that might sound like a slight to a lot of people, like, oh, he's coming in to be a wide receiver 2, like, whatever. I think that's super valuable in 2025. I think that having somebody who can come in and be your rock, tight ends are more and more being used as weapons as opposed to security blankets. So I think if you can have a receiver who can really be a security blanket, that gives you a lot of versatility in your offense with how you want to use your tight end, how your wide receiver one performs. So Emeka Egbuka is at my number 3 spot.
Yeah, and I mean, you know as well as anybody that kind of wide receiver two element with, your boy Jordan Addison being a Vikings fan for you. Obviously,
Yeah.
he's elevated things for himself, and then of course, being on the opposite side of Justin Jefferson has been a positives too. So I can see the value in what you're saying. I can understand where you're coming from. But for me, Matthew Golden, I do have him slightly above Emeka Egbuka. Again, these are very closely graded players for me, so we're not talking about a stark difference here, in my opinion, from 3 and 4. But Matthew Golden, for me, I like his long speed a little bit more. I think he's got a little more burst than Emeka Egbuka. He does have that inside-outside versatility that I would like to have seen from Emeka Egbuka. Not to say that I don't think he can do it, but I just, there's not as much time on task with Emeka Egbuka here, whereas Matthew Golden has done it. Again, transfer player. He wasn't really expected to be the wide receiver one for Texas, but then, kind of gradually came into that role for them. So I think that from a storyline standpoint, like we kind of touched on a few times, I think that's a positive for him. There is a little bit of issue with Golden here with some contact balance and like playing through contact and things like that. Not the biggest guy in the world. I think he's only at like 6 foot, just under 200 pounds, so not the best frame, but he's a savvy route runner, great catch radius like you talked about. Those are things that are going to be important at the next level. And again, I think his, from a route running standpoint, his acceleration, deceleration, which again we talked about in draft guide video, it is very good, and I think that will allow him to separate at the next level. So I think with, get him on somebody like the Bills with Josh Allen, I think that would be a great fit, as well as some other teams too. So or Steelers, again, some random teams are kind of thrown out there. I think that's kind of their range, both of these guys in the 20s to late 20s personally for me.
Yeah, most certainly. I like that. As we transition to number 2, Luther Burden the third for me. And I was late to the party. I will fully admit that. I was someone who kind of avoided the Luther Burden videos, Luther Burden All 22 film, just because I had a thought in my head where I'm not a big after the catch guy. I'm not a
You
big
made an assumption.
I made an assumption, and I will gladly eat my words because Luther Burden is that guy. Obviously, the forced missed tackles are so hard to ignore on film. It feels like he is literally covered in oil every time he has the ball in his hands. It's super exciting to watch. He's actually creeping up on the number 1 spot for me. For the wide receiver one for the class. Gives me Brandon Cooks vibes out of Oklahoma State whenever he played.
I could see that.
Actually more technical. This is a maybe slightly less technical Brandon Cooks, but also more of a after the catch threat. The frame is similar. That's kind of where I draw that comp from. But no, I really like Luther Burden, and I'm super excited to see where he lands. If he lands in a wide receiver 2 role, I think that he could really explode. Next to like a CeeDee Lamb at 12 with the Cowboys or something like that. Just kind of playing around with destinations. I think that could be a real problem if he gets paired next to another true wide receiver 1. Obviously is the case for most of these guys, but particularly Luther Burden, given his ability to make people miss.
Yeah, no, I agree. His forced missed tackles, I think he had, what was it, close to 40 or something like that? 30,
I think
40?
I think it was somewhere in the 30s. I mean,
Yeah,
making
so
people
that's
miss.
obviously really, really high. He's got that speed that I don't know if Jalen Royals has. Again, going back to my list a little bit here, so that's certainly a benefit for Luther Burden as well. He's got just kind of that burst that you really want. So I could see all that. For me, Tech McMillan is number 2, and it's only because number 1 is such a special player, in my opinion. But yeah, Tech McMillan for me, number 2. And again, we're looking at who I think could be a true X number 1 wide receiver at the next level. You could play him on the outside. You can play him as a big slot, in my opinion. There are some questions about his separation ability, and then also like kind of his long speed down the field. In my opinion, though, it's kind of similar to like the Drake London conversation, where I was actually quite high on Drake London in that draft, and they do kind of come from they're kind of cut from a similar cloth, in my opinion, where they're these not great separators, but big frame, really good hands, better route runners than you would imagine. And I think Ted McMillan is actually a better route runner than Drake London. He's a lot smoother, I would say. For somebody at his frame, you wouldn't expect him to be as silky is the word I'll use on this one.
That's a great
Yeah.
word.
So, he's a silky route runner. Again, people are questioning his speed. And that franchise guy, for those of you who watch him on Twitter and YouTube and things like that, he's really high on Tech McMillan. And one thing that he talks about is I think people are confusing the fact that Tech McMillan is not fast for the fact that he tempos his routes really well. And, we kind of talked about that again in our draft guide video. You're not always wanting to go full speed all the time on these routes, and you're wanting to kind of tempo things a little bit to find the opening in the zone coverage and certain things like that. So for me, I think there's a lot of upside to Tech McMillan. And then, of course, that brings us to our number one player. I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video. Micah does not have Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, so that's why he's excluded from this ranking video. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and kind of follow up on Ted McMillan there? I know I said a lot, so I hope I didn't take all you were going to say.
No, definitely not. There were a few things I wanted to point out, but obviously you pointed it out first is the Travis Hunter absence on my list. I don't view Travis Hunter as a receiver, so I'm not even considering him for my list, especially if he ends up playing both ways. I can't consider somebody who's going to play 15 to 20 snaps a game. At least that's the thought right now.
Well, I don't know if we've released the video yet. If we have released the video, go watch the Travis Hunter debate video that we put out. If we haven't released it yet, spoiler alert, that's coming next. So check that out when that releases. So sorry for the mix-up here, but it's not sure when that's going to get released.
It's either before or after this video or sometime, in the mix, but you'll see it. So, but yeah, nothing new about Travis Hunter. He's just not on my list for this specific video. But Ted McMillan, my number one. Graham's mentioned it. Not a incredible athlete from the the speed perspective. I think one affinity that I have with prospects is people who do things that they shouldn't be able to do. That's one thing that I value because I think that having a frame like Ted McMillan, but with the quickness and the agility of somebody who's maybe a sub 6 foot guy, is something that is super intriguing to me, and I get caught up in the possibilities of what that looks like at the next level. Great hands, same thing as I mentioned with Matthew Golden, super wide catch radius. Obviously, he's got the arm length, he's got the hand size, the frame, all of it to win those contested catches. But I think that he and me and Graham have a big thing for separators, and that's one knock on Ted is I don't know what his separation ability looks like, but I think that he's so long and so quick that he'll be able to, he doesn't need to be the best separator in the world because he can box people out with his body and his frame because of that technical side that he has down pat. So I really like Ted, number one player in the class for the receiver position for me.
Yeah, and again, not to bring it back to Drake London too much, but I think that was kind of a counterpoint with Drake London was like, yeah, he's not the best separator, but instead of a 50-50 ball when you're throwing it to Drake London, it's more like a 90-10 ball. And that's kind of a similar thing to Ted McMillan where, I don't know if his contested catch ability is like quite as good, but it's the fact that he's got those long arms. He is a savvy route runner. So it all kind of evens out in the end, I think. So I think certainly Ted McMillan is up there for the receiver class, obviously. But yeah, for me, I am including Travis Hunter. Again, referencing the other video, I think there's certainly a conversation to be had where Travis Hunter could be a full-time wide receiver in the NFL. Obviously, I did a breakdown video on Travis Hunter as a receiver specifically. So that one is definitely out. So if you guys want to go check that out, please do. But yeah, obviously very technically sound as a player, both offensively and defensively. But as a receiver, I was really impressed by his technical skills. I maybe for one kind of just assumed, maybe not watching a ton, that he was just going to be such an incredible athlete that's really what carried him and allowed him to be on that side of the ball. No, it's the fact that he's a technically sound wide receiver. He does things like catch the ball and extend the ball away from his body when he's got a DB on his back. He, knows how to sit in zone coverage versus just running full speed through the coverage there and finding the window in the defense. So, yeah, a lot to like about Travis Hunter. Obviously, he's got that big playability too. So, for me, easy number one receiver, not just because he's such a good player, overall, it's because I truly would have him as a wide receiver one in this class if he was full-time receiver. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it very nicely. It'll be interesting to see how he's used, but again, we covered that in a video, so you'll see that when that comes out, either before or after this. Um, yeah, but this is a super deep class at receiver. Obviously, there's guys who didn't even make my list, like a Jalen Royals, who is an intriguing prospect as well. Feels very well rounded. A lot of guys like that, and you didn't have someone like Jaden Higgins on your list.
Yeah, and they could have easily been. I think we talked about this a little bit, but there are a lot of those receivers in that kind of, you know, early day two, mid day two kind of range that I think are going to be pretty good contributors at the next level. And I think that's kind of been the sentiment for this entire draft class is there may not be a ton of superstars, but there are going to be a lot of, pretty decent NFL, players.
Certainly, yeah.
Low end starters, mid tier starters, that sort of thing. So I think that's certainly the case for the receivers as well.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I had for the receivers. Do you have anything you wanted to touch on before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, let us know if you guys agree with anything, disagree with anything. Let us know what position you want us to do next. But that's pretty much all I got. Yeah, thanks for watching here, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you guys soon. Thanks.
See ya.